Hey, also for this unit, we are talking about prenatal development. So what's going on as the two cells become one, become multiple, become noses and eyeballs and fingernails. And then we'll also talk about, we'll talk about baby's experience with development. We'll talk about mom's experience with development. And then we'll also talk about some of the things that might create challenges during a pregnancy. So the first part of the unit really looks at the developing child's, I guess you could say, experiences. So we're talking about the germinal stage of development, we're talking about the embryonic stage of development, we're talking about the fetal stage of development, and we're learning about all of the different things that are occurring during these time periods. So for example, we're learning about when does the neural tube form, and the neural tube is going to become the brain and the spinal cord. We're learning about when does it start to develop hair, when does the baby start to develop nails, all that sort of stuff. And these are useful things to know because um, we want to know what is going on at specific time periods, because if mom or the carrying parent ingests some sort of what we call teratogens or experiences teratogens, because some of them aren't ingested, then that could influence that development. So a teratogen is anything that can cause a problem during pregnancy, either for mom or for baby. It can be alcohol. It could be smoke. So it could be, from smoking, from secondhand smoke, but also, if mom was in a fire, and breathing in smoke can influence the development of baby as well. We can also talk about teratogens such as, substance use, cocaine, methamphetamines. One thing that's really important to think about is medications that mom takes or the carrying parent takes while they're pregnant. There's a lot of discussion about, especially related to mental health and mental health medications, of whether or not carrying parents should continue to use their medication. And this is a discussion that each person is going to have with their obstetrician and gynecologist or OBGYN. And the discussion is really going to be around what are the possible outcomes of continuing to take this medication for baby, for mom, but also what are the possible outcomes if we don't continue to take this medication for baby and for mom. So for example, if mom experiences depression, then it's possible that the not taking the medication could influence the carrying parent to the point where they would no longer be able to sustain the pregnancy. So we really have to take this kind of like cost benefit analysis when we're looking at especially psychotropic medications. So I'll give you an example. When I was pregnant with my first son, I have generalized anxiety disorder, which basically means that I can experience panic attacks. I can experience anxiety throughout the day, and it can be related to specific things. And so I was taking an anti-anxiety medication every day, and my doctor said, you're on a really low dose of it. The potential side effects include cleft lip, cleft palate, and but the research shows that those things typically occur when the parent is taking higher doses of those medications. And so my doctor and I talked about it and decided that I would continue taking the medications so that I could continue to be healthy while I was pregnant, and so that there wouldn't be complications of removing the medication when I was pregnant. So there's going to be some discussions about health, wellness, nutrition, medications. I remember when I had my first son, I went in. Basically, what will happen is if you get your first positive home pregnancy test or HPT, then you will call your OBGYN and say, I had my first positive home pregnancy test, and they will schedule you to come in to usually draw blood and to do a urine just to make sure that you are indeed pregnant. And then they'll start having conversations with you about health and nutrition, and talking about possible teratogens and how to avoid them. And I remember there was this pink sheet, and it was just a list of things to avoid. And there was some of the stuff on this list that I was just like, holy crud. Like, um, we want to try to avoid deli meats because they could have bacteria that could cause problems. There's certain exercises that we want to avoid. Like, there's just lists and lists of stuff. You almost feel like as a person who is pregnant, you feel like you should live in this bubble for the next 9 months so that everything can be healthy. And I will tell you that even if you did live in a bubble for the next 9 months, it's possible that there might be some genetic cause that could influence the pregnancy that nobody was even considering. Another interesting thing that I found while I was pregnant is that so there's lots of questions of, do you have a family history of this? Do you have a family history of that? And my family didn't always talk about family histories of genetic disorders or things like that. And so I had a lot of tests, especially during my first pregnancy, to see if I had any genetic markers for XYZ. XYZ meaning different genetic disorders. And then, I would get back my results, and I would call my mom, and I would say, oh, they found that I'm a carrier for multiple sclerosis. And my mom's like, yeah, that's right, I am too. And I'm like, that would have been great to know. So I feel like a lot of times people, when they become pregnant, if they mention these things to their families, a lot of times out comes the health information. Oh yeah, I had that too. And it's like, been really super helpful to know that beforehand. But then the question becomes, when would that have ever come up in conversation? So if you're a person who is interested in becoming pregnant, it might be a good idea to have a conversation similar to that of like, maybe make a list or print out a list and say, like, has anybody in our family ever been diagnosed with this or with that? During your genetic testing, if you had any during your pregnancy, did you, hear about any of this sort of stuff? And sometimes we remember, sometimes we don't. But so yeah, it's definitely an interesting experience to learn more about your family's biological history as you're going through this pregnancy experience. So we will talk about the baby's experience, so the germinal stage, the embryonic stage, and the fetal stage, and then we'll talk about mom's experience, which is usually broken up into the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, and when I say mom, I'm talking about the person carrying the baby. So if we've got a couple who is two women and they used IVF or donor sperm, then we consider both of them mom. But when I talk about mom, I'm talking about the person who is carrying the baby. So we do talk about, like I said, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, and what's going on in terms of growth, in terms of development, but also in terms of what the experiences for the carrying parent are going to be during that time. A lot of times during the first trimester, we're going to be experiencing nausea, we're going to be experiencing low levels of energy. We may experience, or probably will experience, breast tenderness. I will tell you that in my experience and a lot of the research that I've read, the times when there is expansive growth going on, so like something really big is going on with the developing child, these are the times that you will feel the most tired, because it's almost like we have this energy well, and making baby is using up a lot of it. So I remember there was one time where I literally, it was a Saturday and I just could not drag myself out of bed. I was so tired. And I was talking to my OBGYN after that, and she was like, yeah, you're probably making a placenta at that time. And I was just like, yeah, because I mean, that requires a lot of energy and oxygen and all that sort of stuff. So it's really interesting to be able to kind of correlate between the two experiences of how mom is feeling and then, what's going on with baby. I will tell you that there's a lot of stories out there that people will tell you that um, the morning sickness is usually over by the end of the first trimester. A couple things about that. Morning sickness isn't just in the morning. It is this general, or it can be, I should say, this general feeling of nausea like all day, every day. And you just feel like that I could almost vomit throughout most of the day. Sometimes eating small snacks as opposed to larger meals can help with that. It may be a blood sugar thing. Um, Sometimes, if it gets really bad to the point where a person is vomiting often, you can talk to your OBGYN. There are medications that you can take that can help with it. But for most people, it is just an uncomfortable but normal part of pregnancy. Um, and for some people, it does not end at the end of the first trimester. It may end after your pregnancy is over. So one thing that I found that was helpful for me, and that I've talked to a lot of people that they've said is helpful for them, is eating something. It's candied ginger. It can help to settle your stomach and to decrease nausea. I will tell you. So I found mine at Whole Foods in like the bulk area. For me, it was the most disgusting taste I've ever had in my lifetime. But it worked. Like I would eat like a couple of the bites of it and just be like, oh, this is so disgusting. But within doing a couple minutes of doing that, I felt better. And so it was like, okay, I guess I have to try this or I have to keep doing this so that I don't feel nauseated all the time. So that was definitely not a pleasant experience, but like I said, it did work for me. Another experience that moms will have is doing the fasting glucose test. They test for gestational diabetes. So most people will have the 1 hour fasting glucose test. Basically, it's where you go to either your doctor's office or a lab, like LabCorp, and you drink this absolutely disgusting. It tastes like Kool-Aid that someone put like 4 times too much sugar in there and not enough taste in there. It tastes gross. Um, and then an hour later, they do your blood, and you can't eat beforehand, which for pregnant people can be very challenging. Um, and they see basically how is your body responding to the sugars that it just put in there. If your 1 hour does not come back the way that your OB wants it to look, then they may ask you to do the 2 hour fasting glucose. Or I've even talked to a couple people that said that they had to do longer ones. Um, so that is probably one of the least pleasant parts of pregnancy. Um, as you get further along in your pregnancy, it becomes challenging to do stuff like trim your own toenails, shave your legs, because of the fact that you're obviously gaining weight in a certain area, which can make touching your feet, touching your toes challenging. Another thing that we might hear about during pregnancy, especially from our OB, is weight gain. So, how much weight have we gained? Is it a healthy amount? Some OBs are more focused on it than other ones are. Mine was not too focused on my weight gain, especially for my first pregnancy, because with your first pregnancy, you don't really know as much what to expect. And so you kind of eat all the things whenever your body says, like, I want this. And you're like, okay. But we do have to try to manage our intake of foods and to continue to exercise as much as possible, so that we're not gaining 80, 90 pounds during our pregnancies, because this can put stress on our body, can put stress on baby. And so that's one of the reasons why our doctors will really kind of take a look at weight gain from appointments to appointment and see, is it within the normal range, or is it above normal range? And should we be thinking about, more exercise and focusing more on fruits and veggies as snacks, as opposed to uh, a tub of Sour Patch Kids, which I did once because it was really good and that's what I wanted to eat at the time. And then my husband ratted me out to the OB because I had apparently gained more between appointments. And she was like, "Oh, I see you've gained more between this appointment and the last appointment." And my husband's like, "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you eat a whole box of Sour Patch Kids." And I'm like, "Really? You're going to rat me out?" And she was just like, "Okay, look, you could have Sour Patch Kids. That's fine." She's like, "But just, not the whole," because it wasn't a box. It was like one of those plastic square containers that you get from bulk candy. Yeah. So we do want to keep track of those sorts of things. Another thing we will talk about in this chapter, which I've already talked a little about, is teratogens and how they impact us. One thing that you might hear often is that some people will say, a little bit of alcohol isn't going to hurt baby XYZ. Here's my thought. There are so many teratogens that might impact a pregnancy that if we know of one and we can avoid it, then I would say that we should. But, there are some people that have a glass of wine a week in order to relax, and their OB says that that's okay. And like I said, it's, if you are really concerned about teratogens, you want to avoid as many of them as you can that you know of. So, another thing that's really important is the timing of the intake or the experience with the teratogen. So, I've talked to a lot of people that said, I didn't realize I was pregnant and I went out drinking with my friends. Is my child going to have fetal alcohol? And we can't answer that immediately. But what we can say is that, teratogens can be especially negative and impactful during the germinal stage. And a lot of times, rather than causing harm, it might cause spontaneous abortion, or what we call miscarriage. If the cells are not able to continue developing and growing in the way that they should, the body might just remove the pregnancy because of the level of teratogen. So we want to know, at what point did we use the substance, or were we exposed to the substance, because that could impact the development of the child. And I will leave you with one example of this. When I was working as a therapist, we had this one client. And the office that I worked in was actually, it was funded by the state of Rhode Island, and it provides services for families that were experiencing financial hardships. And so it wasn't really insurance based, it was more of community health. And so, as a therapist that was assigned to a client, I could work with this client and their family on any sort of issues, housing issues, that sort of stuff, as many hours as needed. So, it wasn't like I had to bill insurance and they would tell me, like, you can only have a certain number of hours with that client. So, we provided kind of wraparound services along with counseling for the child who was the actual client. And so there was this one client who had been in and out of our program multiple times, and everyone prior to me had diagnosed him with ADHD because he did have a lot of challenges with attention and with hyperactivity, with focus, making poor decisions, all of these frontal lobe challenges that we see with kids with high levels of ADHD. And so I was redoing the intake form with mom. Unfortunately, every 6 months we had to redo the intake form. And one of the questions on our intake form asked about prenatal development and asked about substance use during pregnancy. And I will tell you right now, if you're going to work in a hospital, if you're going to work with children, you're going to be asking parents about substance use during prenatal development. Anytime you ask a client, do you use any substances? People automatic response, oh, no, I don't use substances. But I will tell you right now, how many of y'all drink coffee? Coffee's a substance. How many of y'all drink alcohol? Alcohol's a substance. And so when we go and ask this very broad question of substance use, people perceive it as like cocaine and crystal meth and things like that. And so we, instead of asking, did you use any substances while you were pregnant? We want to instead ask questions such as, so usually here I ask about substance use during pregnancy. So let me ask you some specific questions. Did you drink coffee while you were pregnant? Yes, no, tea, caffeinated tea. Okay, how much? How often? So how many ounces of coffee are we talking about? Um, and then we can kind of go through the different sorts of substances, because as I said, if you just ask substances, people are going to say no. But if we say, what about alcohol? Did you drink any alcohol during your pregnancy, even maybe before you realized that you were pregnant? So I was talking to this mom, and I was putting into use what I just told you. And I said, so, during pregnancy with him, did you, drink coffee? I knew that she smoked cigarettes now. I said, did you smoke cigarettes while you were pregnant with him? I said, did you, use any other substances, maybe cocaine or maybe methamphetamine? And she kind of went, no, no. And then she paused and she said, oh. And I was thinking to myself, oh? And she said, I was using heroin while I was pregnant with him. I will tell you right now, as a clinician who works with children, who's doing an intake with a parent, your job at this point is to make your face not do the look, okay? Because then you're going to lose the family, you're going to lose the client. You need to be building bridges with these folks. And so the next question becomes, okay, so how often while you were pregnant, how much, or how, throughout the pregnancy, or did you stop at a certain point? And if you stopped at a certain point, how did you stop? Did you go through a program? Because stopping using a substance that we've used for a long time can actually have a very detrimental effect on the individual, but also on baby. So we want to know, did you, slowly decrease use over time, or did you just stop using it? And so what we figured out eventually, and there's more to this story that I don't always enjoy sharing with people, but what we eventually figured out is that this child had frontal lobe damage from heroin use during pregnancy. And so he didn't have ADHD. He had symptoms that looked similar to ADHD, but what he had actually was neurological damage due to heroin use during pregnancy. And so it's really important for us to know, as a therapist, as a clinician, as someone working with children, about that prenatal experience, because it can negatively impact children for a long period of time. And it may look like something else. So, for example, it may look like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder when in fact it's actually brain damage from substance use during pregnancy. So I don't want to leave you on that negative note, though. So I will tell you that a large majority of pregnancies end up working out well. As you can see, if you look around and, you see people that are healthy, moms that are healthy. We will talk about what happens when we do not have a healthy experience in this class. And the reason I think that's important is because it is so untalked about. I don't know how many friends and family members I've had that have experienced miscarriage. that don't talk about it. And it is an overwhelming experience. It's an emotional experience. It's a heartbreaking experience. You worry that you did something that caused this. Like, there's so many emotions that go on. And then there's also the biological aspect of the miscarriage going on. And now there's some social cultural stuff within the United States that will be influencing how you might be treated if you experience a miscarriage. And again, it's not something that we walk around and talk about. We don't wear t-shirts that says, I had 5 miscarriages before I had a healthy baby. And so a lot of women, or a lot of people who carried their baby that ended up miscarrying or having a stillborn, they don't have people that they can talk to about it because, again, nobody walks around talking about it. Nobody kind of says, hey, that happened to me too. And if you want, I'm here to talk about it. Unless we bring it up and we let people know, like, hey, I experienced a miscarriage this weekend. I was pregnant, and I'm having some trouble with that. I'm, dealing with the outcomes of that inside my head. And so if I'm a little, teary or frustrated or overwhelmed, then that will explain why. And sometimes if we explain that to people, people will come out and say, like, oh my gosh, I had miscarriage too. If you want to talk about it, I'm here to talk to you. But yeah, many times people experience these things alone. Because in the United States and in most cultures, it's just not something that we talk about. So it is important for us to talk about them. It is important for us to give people space to talk about their experiences so that they don't feel so alone in their loss and their grieving and their processes. All right, so I did end up leaving you on a negative note, and I'm sorry about that, but this is definitely one of the chapters where we need to be thinking about those sorts of things. So I hope that you find some interesting stuff in this unit. If you have any questions or you want me to do a mini lecture on a particular thing, let me know and I can record it and post it for you. Thanks.